Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, mona wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast, an iHeartRadio Best Kids and Family Podcast Award nominee. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted and so grateful and so very happy that you're joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show in the iHeartRadio app, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible, Himalaya, Ghana, Podcast Addict, Good Pods, wherever you find your podcasts. Our guest today is Dr. Peter Salerno. He is here to celebrate Fit for Off Duty. Before we invite Dr. Peter into the studio, we would love to ask you if you can help us grow the show. And a great way to do that is by simply letting your friends and family know about the podcast. Yeah, just let them know that they can visit the website, readingwithyourkids.com. They can hear the latest episodes right there from our homepage. They can also find our show on our Facebook feed on facebook.com/readingwithyourkids. We also put a link to every episode on our Twitter feed at Jedley Magic. We make an announcement about the show on our Instagram page at Reading with Your Kids. Hey, you know what else would really be a big help? If you could write a fantastic 5-star review of the show on Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcast from. Thanks so much for being part of our wonderful Reading with Your Kids family, and thanks for help spreading the word. We're going to be doing something a little bit different in this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest today is coming to us from Temecula in the great state of California. His name is Dr. Peter Salerno. He's here to talk to us about a book he wrote. It's called Fit for Duty. It's not a book that you're going to read to your kids, but it's a book with a lot of information that you might want to share with your kids at certain points, and certainly share with family and friends who may benefit from it. Please welcome to the show, Dr. Peter Salerno. Hey, Dr. Peter, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me, Jed.
Excited to have you here. This is a bit of a different kind of topic. Normally we're talking about great books that we can sit down and read with our kids. I don't think families going to read Fit for Duty with their kids, but I think it offers parents a great insight into the lives of many of our neighbors who put their lives on the line for us every single day.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about Fit for Duty, please.
So the book originally came about because I do a lot of work in my therapy practice with first responders. And I was noticing that a lot of the things that impact them on the job transfer to home life, to family life, to domestic life. And their children and significant others, spouses, are certainly impacted by what they are exposed to while on duty. I grew up in a firefighter family. My father is a firefighter, and so is my brother. And just growing up, I noticed as a son and a brother the kind of subtle changes that take place in the personality and behavior of first responders. You know, they endure a lot. They see a lot that civilians don't see, aren't exposed to. And it absolutely impacts family life. And so I wanted to provide a resource that would help families kind of understand sort of how to deal with the healing process of that, but also open up communication channels and have families communicate a little bit better on what it is that is impacting them, if anything, related to the job as a first responder. Yeah. And so I tried to create a very practical, simple, short, to the point sort of manual that even families can read so that they can kind of get a better understanding of their loved one who is a first responder.
Yeah. You know, firefighting is one of those jobs that I think, 75, 85% of kids at some point in their life, they think, I want to grow up to be a firefighter. And, something certainly that was something I investigated pursuing myself until at the physical, the doctor said, yeah, you're just too small. You can't do this. And he was probably right. But you mentioned that firefighters in particular are exposed to a lot of things that we aren't exposed to. And you didn't say thankfully. And I think that we should be thankful that we don't have to experience so much of what firefighters have to experience on a really regular basis, if not day to day, certainly month to month basis.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and we should be thankful because typically what they experience is abnormal if you think about it. And we have a certain threshold, a certain level of capacity, if you will, to tolerate things that are unpleasant. They are experiencing unpleasant things, day in, day out on duty. And I think what a lot of people don't know about firefighters is they don't always fight fires. They're responsible. I mean, whenever somebody has an issue, they call 911 and the fire department arrives. So growing up where I grew up in Orange County, there were very few fires. My father predominantly responded to, I would say 90% of his calls were medical aids. Mm-hmm. So they go on all kinds of things that you would see at like a hospital, for example, a lot of emergency calls. And that stuff takes a toll on the nervous system and it kind of shifts your perspective on reality, on life, on what's really going on out there that people like me, a civilian, and most aren't really exposed to on a regular basis. And that is why I decided to write a book about it, to offer a resource, one, just to normalize that if you're having any, stress-related issues that are impacting the family, impacting your relationship with your kids, that it's completely normal. It would be abnormal if you didn't have, if you weren't impacted by things like that. So the challenge is learning how to communicate in such a way where you can help your family understand that a lot of the things you come home with, maybe the mood you're in, maybe the the way that you communicate, could have a lot to do with not the relationship itself, but just the kind of state that you're in, that sort of on guard, kind of intense adrenaline rush that is required while on duty, but off duty doesn't necessarily
it's not helpful.
Fit so well with the family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think a lot of firefighters, and certainly correct me if I'm wrong, but we have this image of firefighters, of these big, brave men and women who rush towards danger when everybody else is running away. They're rushing towards danger. Mm-hmm. And certainly you mentioned adrenaline. Adrenaline helps with a lot of that. They're trained. They're obviously courageous, but they have this adrenaline going with them. I think the thing, if I'm hearing you right, that is probably most traumatic is what they experience after that rush is over, after the immediate emergency is over, the fire is out, the people are pulled from the burning vehicles or the mm-hmm. accident, and then they have mm-hmm. to look and see what has happened to these human beings. And I think that must be very difficult when you're sort of telling yourself, and society tells you, you're big, you're strong, you're a man, you're a manly man. Even if you're a woman firefighter, you're a manly woman firefighter. And mm-hmm. These feelings that you're feeling when you're seeing a person who's been broken and burned and suffering, that doesn't really quite fit. And you don't oftentimes know where to put that.
Exactly. And they're not really trained to put it anywhere. They're actually kind of taught to suck it up, mm-hmm. To maintain that, as you're talking about, that kind of heroic sort of, impervious facade, if you will, that these things don't faze them. So, but as we kind of evolve, as the fire service itself evolves, the need for, emotional and mental health care and, basically this invitation of letting them know that there is help out there, that they can't really just forget these things after they come home. They impact every aspect of their life. So I think the good news is the fire department itself is evolving to recognize that, trauma is something that can't just be, swept under the rug. And so people are more willing to seek help now, I think, than they were in the past. And firefighters are all of those things. They are heroic, they are brave, but they're also human, and they have their own needs. And so it's just important to kind of promote and expose them to resources that can kind of help them feel more like themselves when they're off duty.
I know that firefighters have this unique bond that I think is possibly happens in the military, but it's very much the firefighters that I've had the pleasure to perform for and their families. They very much become this huge extended family because they're working these long hours, and we're not talking 8-10 hours a day. We're talking 36, 48 hour shifts, 72-hour shifts where they're together and they're sleeping and they're eating and they're rushing out to fires together. Does that community, do those relationships, do they help the healing process, or does it kind of interfere with it in that, like, wow, I'm going to look weak to my fellow firefighters if I go and get help?
I mean, I think it's a little bit of both. I think I think the camaraderie that you're speaking of is certainly helpful on duty. I've had a lot of firefighters report to me that was something that's sort of a buffer they rely on when they get back from a pretty bad call, that they kind of have this family unit, this family system, at the station that kind of helps them. They process in their own kind of ways, I think when people hold this kind of more old school mindset, which I mentioned in my book, this sort of good old boys club mentality, that they're hesitant or reluctant to go to a supervisor and say, hey, that one call is just kind of rattling me and I just can't seem to get it out of my head. I think they're more reluctant to be vulnerable in that regard most of the time. I think lately, though, even with just this entire, kind of the crisis the world is in, if you will, mental health has become like a buzzword, and people are more willing to seek out, mental health services. I think it's, in a good way, it's sort of being so normalized that there's nothing wrong with you if you need help. Whereas before, I think they relied solely on that camaraderie, at the station, that sort of family. But again, that's good enough for when you're on duty. When you're off duty, though, then you go home and you don't have that camaraderie. You have your kids, you have your spouse, and you want to be able to turn that switch off, that adrenaline switch, so that you can be present and available for your domestic life. And I think that's probably one of the more difficult challenges that they're facing right now is, how do I do that? How do I just stop being, ready for duty?
Yeah. And I'm imagining everybody listening to the podcast understands that you've had a long day at work. I have this very, very pleasant, but also very vivid memory that happened maybe 20 years ago when I came home after performing all morning in Philadelphia, getting in my van, driving all day, the rest of the day home to my family in Boston. And when I arrived at home, my wife said, "Oh, great, you're here. I'm going out. I'm tired of the kids, and it's your turn." And I'm like, how can I take care of this 3 and 5-year-old? I'm exhausted. But that's a different kind of challenge than when you're getting off a 48-hour shift, and during that 48-hour shift, you've seen horror, beyond description. And now you're home, and now you have to deal with the kid who's crying and cranky, and the teenager who's acting up and not going to class, and the wife who is, or the spouse who is like, I've had enough of this. I need to get away. It's your turn.
Yeah. Well, and typically in that case with first responders, there's actually been some research to suggest that they need a decompression phase before they transition back to, their home life, which is kind of misunderstood, and it's kind of difficult because as the example you're using, the spouse, the partner is waiting for the partner to get home so they can be relieved, essentially, right? And so that is always seems to be an issue of contention for people that are involved, that are related to a first responder, is that, of course, the person does, need and deserve to be relieved who's been at home, sort of like a shift change, if you will. The capacity for a first responder, a firefighter, to just kind of jump into that other role after, like you said, a 48-hour shift, and, who knows what they were exposed to during that time, is a lot different. They're also very, sleep compromised. I mean, they're being woken up in the middle of the night several times a night. So their rhythm is sort of compromised in that regard. So there's a lot of self-care factors that kind of need to be introduced to the transition from work to home life. I always encourage not just counseling for the first responder, but bring your kids into counseling, bring your spouse into counseling, so that they can all kind of get an idea of what it is that's actually going on. I think firefighters, not to generalize, but the majority of them would consider themselves pretty simple creatures, and they don't think they need to be processing what they see or experience on duty with a professional. But that sort of oftentimes causes them to turn inward and to sort of dampen or suppress their feelings across the board, which for a kid or a family member could seem like they're disinterested, or they don't have the energy, or they would rather be at work rather than at home. And so those are all things that need to kind of be, explained even to the family.
Yeah. So what can we do? Because most of the folks listening to this are not firefighters themselves. More than likely, they're not married to a firefighter. They might have somebody in their extended family. But there are all ways that we can help as a society. What are some of the things that we can do to help support firefighters and other first responders?
I would say build awareness that there are resources out there that actually do work, that help. And a lot of them are kind of short-term in nature. I emphasize that in my book. I think there's a reluctance to seek help when you think it's going to be this daunting task. It's like you finally have your day off. Like, last thing I want to do is go talk to a counselor. But there are a lot of resources out there that are, like, in a way, quick fixes. I think just building awareness that they're out there, and supporting firefighters in normalizing that there's nothing wrong with somebody if they're having, work-related stress, to go figure out a way to deal with it. It's no longer, I think the stigma is slowly but surely shifting, that everybody needs support, and the support can come in various ways. As you mentioned earlier, the support can come through the camaraderie of the department on duty. The support can come from family off duty, but it can also come from, just learning how to kind of live your best life off duty. And sometimes that might require looking into resources that are coming from a more professional standpoint. So just kind of, I would say, normalizing this idea that seeking help is okay.
Yeah. And one of the things that our show is all about is just encouraging families to have conversations. And, those conversations start with our kids when we're sitting on the couch reading to our babies who aren't able to read. We encourage families to continue that conversation. at the dinner table, in the van, on the way to school or soccer practice or ballet, conversations about stories. And there are certainly lots of stories that we read with our kids, that we co-read with our kids, that talk about firefighters and first responders. What kind of messages can we share with our 5-year-olds about the realities of firefighters without scaring them? And what different kind of conversations can we have with our older kids to help them understand just what these brave men and women are going through on our behalf?
All right. I wouldn't recommend reading my book to your children.
No, not at all.
But maybe your teenage children. But I mean, I think that you mentioned communication, opening those communication channels. I think it's people take communication for granted as if it's something that just comes to us naturally. I think it takes some skill to learn how to communicate appropriately for every developmental stage, whether your kids are 2, 3, 4, 5, or, teenagers. I would say that, you don't want to expose your children to those horrific things that a firefighter would see, but you do want to explain to them how you feel because of your work. And you can do that pretty generically, without revealing anything that's kind of inappropriate for a certain, age range. So I would say the biggest step is to actually start the communication. I've encouraged firefighters to write letters to their kids. Sometimes when I'm irritated or I'm mad, it has nothing to do with you. It's just because work is very stressful and hard, and it's a hard job. And sometimes I see things that are difficult for me to, just forget. Like a scary movie or, maybe a bad dream. Just kind of speak in their language. But I would certainly get the communication channels open on a regular basis. And that promotes a lot of validation for kids. I've worked with firefighters who they've told me that when they walk in the door, their kids go silent, almost like they're kind of, oh, great, mom or dad's home now. The whole climate of the house is going to change. And I think, kids are extremely perceptive and intuitive, so they pick up on that energy, that emotional energy that we kind of carry around us. And so just something like an intervention right off the bat, like explaining why the firefighter feels the way they feel, and that it has nothing to do with the kids or the family, and they just need a little bit of time to regroup, I think is extremely relieving for children and spouses to hear, versus just kind of keeping it all inside and everybody's kind of wondering what's going on and kind of walking on eggshells, maybe not sure like what they're supposed to say or ask or, what's needed for everyone. So.
Would it be appropriate for somebody listening to this to go out and grab Fit for Duty and just drop it off at the local firehouse?
Yeah, I think that would be great. No, I think, I think firefighters, from my experience, I kind of vetted the book with firefighters before I published it. I kind of had some advanced copies I'd asked some firefighters to read to see if it was even going to be helpful, and I've received some pretty good feedback from it. So I don't think that would be a bad idea. A lot of the feedback that I received was that young men and women just getting into the profession sometimes don't know what they're getting themselves into, and so it would be sort of like a supplemental text for their training that these are the things that you're going to want to address early on in your career so that it doesn't kind of sneak up on you. So I don't think it would be a bad idea to gift the book as a resource for firefighters. And I think so far I've heard that it's increased a lot of clarity in even veteran firefighters who didn't know why they thought or felt or behaved in some of the ways that they did. And they can sort of kind of, catalog their career and realize, wow, like it did change me. There are things that I just didn't really know about myself or recognize about myself because of all of the time I spent on duty. That, it's never too late. So it's just a good idea to kind of gain some clarity and understanding of just what the impact of the job is for you and your loved ones.
Yeah. And I know we have a lot of listeners out there who belong to different fraternal organizations or civic organizations, churches and whatnot. Mm-hmm. This might be just a fun project, an important project, to help get this information to firefighters and other first responders. They give so much to us. Their families make so many sacrifices for us that if we can give them a little added extra support that can help them experience the joy that we hope we feel, because we do look at them as heroes and we want them to be happy and we want their families to be happy. This might be a great way to make that happen. Peter, where can people go to find out more about Fit for Duty and also find out more about you?
Well, I have my website, which is drpetersalerno.com, and that's also my professional website. And then just kind of jumping on the bandwagon of social media, just for the promotion of the book. So I have my my Instagram, which is Dr. Peter Salerno, and then the book is available on Amazon for purchase, as well as some other stores. I think it's available on Barnes and Noble and some other online stores as well.
Super, super. Well, this is a really important conversation, and I hope that all of us are, if you haven't been involved in this conversation before, let's hope that this is the start to an ongoing conversation about how we can support the men and women who are giving so much of themselves for us to keep us and our families safe. Dr. Peter, I want to thank you for what you're doing for firefighters and other first responders, and I want to thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much for having me, Jed.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We'll have two fantastic authors on celebrating their books. First, coming to us from Istanbul in Turkey, Gülhasan Yıldız Mentis will be here to celebrate the helpful deer. And then from Long Island, Talia Madden will be here to celebrate the colors they shared. Hey, we want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to start by thanking our guest, Dr. Peter Salerno. Please be sure to check out Fit for Off Duty. And also, please consider purchasing Fit for Off Duty for the firefighters and first responders in your community. They put their lives on the line for us every single day. They are experiencing trauma serving us. I think if we can help them by just giving them access to this fantastic book, it would be greatly appreciated and be a real beautiful, beautiful thing that you could do. Also want to thank my team, Alejandro Doherty, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Skylar Strauss. Want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.